one of the things that we always did as women's organisations, and particularly Women Against Rape, we went on the demonstrations, to fight alongside them for the rights of low-paid workers, but also making visible that sexual violence, particularly against women workers, and particularly from not only clients and customers, but from colleagues and managers, who were in charge, again, of an abuse of power.
So let's talk a little bit about the sexual harassment at work. What can you tell us about this form of domination, of this patriarchal domination, and how do you deal with it?
Well, for a few years now, we've been involved in campaigning against sexual harassment at work, together with the Bakers Union, whose members are working in the fast food and hospitality industries, so very low paid, often on 0-hour contracts. And they asked us the union actually asked us to partner them in a campaign against sexual harassment. And it was in 2018, really in the context of the Me Too movement that happened, and the workers' rights movements that exploded all over the world. Really focused on ending low pay and precarious work, and also mental health at work. And we spoke at events all over the country and helped them with their campaign publicity. And we met, many lovely women and men campaigners at protests that we joined. Most of the more well-known campaigns were against McDonald's. You might have heard about that, because it was a worldwide movement at some point, very prominent. But unlike in the States, where rape and sexual harassment at work were very central to their demands for higher pay and other better conditions, here in the UK, it didn't figure in the campaign. It just was invisible. So one of the things that we always did as women's organisations, and particularly Women Against Rape, we went on the demonstrations, to fight alongside them for the rights of low-paid workers, but also making visible that sexual violence, particularly against women workers, and particularly from not only clients and customers, but from colleagues and managers, who were in charge, again, of an abuse of power, that was very common as well in a low-paid job, because you have less power and you're worried about getting the sack, which many women across the world also testified to. I remember some very striking statements came out of women farmers in the US, about how the overseers in the fields were able to take advantage of them sexually, because they would just threaten them with the sack if they didn't comply. And so we worked quite closely with the Bakers Union, who are, we very much appreciate the leadership of that particular union, which is very accountable to the grassroots, unlike many other unions where the leadership is very removed. And we've spoken with other unions receptive to what we were saying, but the Bakers Union is a really good, grassroots kind of movement for workers. Just talking about rape and domestic abuse by the police. And the thing is, the campaign for sexual harassment at work is one of many campaigns we've been running. In the last year in particular, there's been a whole raft of very right-wing pieces of legislation coming from this very right-wing government that we have, some of which have not yet been passed, but some have been passed. And just so that your viewers know, there's on top of the austerity and poverty that they've already implemented over the last decade and a bit, there's been a very heavy repressive set of laws, including a thing that they call the Spy Cops Act, which gives more power to undercover police agents to get away with crimes. And there's been a whole outcry because there's a public inquiry on undercover policing that's been going on in the UK for about 9 months, after many years of the police stalling because they refused to comment, which has shown that the police really targeted left-wingers and going for women in particular and having illegitimate sexual relationships with them, deceitful, because they were undercover and pretending to be social activists. And they've also spied on, families campaigning for justice after, for example, racist murder, including families like Stephen Lawrence. And some of these police officers even had fathered children with these women in their double life. And yet they passed this bill, giving them hugely more powers to do the same and worse. And another bill that we've been fighting is the Overseas Operations Bill, which excluded rape, but would have enabled military personnel to commit horrendous crimes, even murder, under cover of a uniform, with impunity. And there were some things won on that, in that some of the worst atrocities were excluded from that protection. The bill still passed, unfortunately. And now we're fighting this other bill, which is a really big overhaul of the whole criminal justice system, called the Police, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Bill, which is a terrible. We were talking earlier about the abuse of police power. It would give sweeping powers to the police. Most well known of this, because there's been so much widespread opposition to it, is that they want to make it almost impossible for people to demonstrate about anything. Take away the right to protest under sufferance of very long sentences or massive fines. And the bill itself is over 300 pages long and it's extremely complicated. But one of the other things it does is it is going to result in many, many more people being stopped and searched, being put into prison without even going to court, being put under surveillance. Obviously, it's going to, horrendously mostly affect people of colour in particular, and Gypsy Roma traveller communities as well. And it's going to result in many more, a massive expansion of the whole prison and detention complex, which is not in our interest whatsoever, because in their just doing blanket much longer sentences in jail, as we've been saying today, the overwhelming majority of women who've been sexually assaulted or raped don't ever get as far as a courtroom. So longer sentences is like it's like a law and order measure which will prey on the genuine anger that women have about injustice, but actually not provide us with any more access to justice or protection. So, as I say, it's a really horrific transfer of power into the police, and will encourage many more racist and violent police officers to join up, and there'll be even less control over their behaviour than there is now. So I just wanted to add that, in the same context as fighting for workers' rights, we're also fighting for all our own lives and our rights to protest about all these terrible things, which women have been at the forefront of, and you can really see that in the environmental movements, for climate justice, and same with the Black Lives Matter movements. A lot of the protesters were women, and younger women.
Well, women de facto are already dominated by male supremacy, by patriarchy, and possibly by other forms of domination, racial domination, class domination. So yeah, women naturally know what domination is, and I would say would have tendency indeed to protest more than other people, than males.
But also, one of the things that women of colour has said, which is really useful to us, to all of us, is that when men are being persecuted by the authorities, it's most often mothers and sisters and wives who do the justice work, you know, and that was really clear in a recent case of Osim Brown, who was a young disabled man who was about to be deported for a crime which he wasn't even involved in and was convicted under joint enterprise. And his mother did a fantastic campaign and assembled all these other people to support him, and he just won the right to stay. And she was an inspiration, really, and many of the organizations and supporters were women.
Can I just add to that? Because you're raising the criminalization of children, you know, which is really being done on a kind of a wholesale basis. The stop and search is one aspect of it, but they also have police officers right inside of the schools, you know, so that there are big movements now, protests, particularly in Manchester, where the mayor there, Andy Burnham, tried to raise the council tax by something like 20, I don't know, some huge amount, raising it to put 20 extra of these officers into schools for surveillance. And the impact of children being criminalized or their parents being criminalized through this things like Prevent means that far more children are ending up in care. You know, they're being seized and taken by social services without, you know, without looking at the situation of what families need in order to survive, in order not to be, you know, sort of picked up by the cops all the time or followed all the rest of it. And it always comes back to the money and the power and the money, you know, the fact that if instead of spending billions on foster care, you gave mothers the money to be able to support and look after their children, we would be in a very different society, you know. And it's so obvious that you bang your head against a brick wall when it's the elephant in the room on pretty much every issue. You know, that if we are to be able to resist rape, violence, any manner of, you know, things that come down on us, we have to have the money in mothers' hands, starting with mothers. We're the primary carers. You know, many of us are grannies. We're also carers. You know, it's so obvious, but you know, that's why, you know, raising the care income at the beginning there, that as Nicola did, you know, would transform all of our lives, and in particular would really transform our children's outcomes and what they can look forward to in life.
In the next part,
women who are disabled are particularly vulnerable to violence. For example, if you're physically disabled, you can't run away, as a very, you know, obvious example. If you're dependent on a carer who's attacking you, you know, you're in this relationship with them. It's very difficult for you to get out of.